In this step, we would focus a little bit on how to debug a Java program. We would move into editing again in one of the further steps, but for now, let's focus on how to debug. And for us to debug something, we need to have a program. So how do I create a Java program to debug? So what I want to create is I would want to loop around an array and write a program to sum the numbers in an array. What I would type in is for e. For e is standing for each, and I press Control space bar. You'd see that there is an option for each coming up. I would say for each, and next it's showing me the syntax for each. I would type in now. I would want an integer, and the name I would want to call it as num, and numbers actually num. I would call it number. And now I can press enter. So now there's an error because the numbers is not really declared. So I can press Control 1 on top of it, and I'm saying create local variable numbers. So already numbers is created. Now I can say what type of it is. It's a int, right? So I would say int numbers, and then again I'm getting a compilation error because numbers is not initialized. I'm saying now initialize variable, and it's saying null, but I don't really want to give null, so I would go ahead and say 1 2 3 4, and so now I can add the number. So what I would want to do is I would want to do sum. I would want to add it up. Sum plus is equal to number. I just typed sum plus is equal to number, and now I'm pressing Control 1 again. So I'm saying create local variable sum. It's creating in here directly, so that's not what I want. I would want to create a local variable a little up. So what I would do is I'll say create local variable sum, but I would actually try and break it up myself. So what I'll do is int sum, and sum is equal to number, and now I want to move this line. The way you can move a line up is by using the alt and using the up arrow. So just press alt up arrow and you would see that the line would move up. And now int sum is equal to number, actually I want to do sum plus is equal to number. So now that's fine, but there's a compilation error. Again I press Control 1 and I'm saying initialize variable is equal to 0. That's very good. So you'd see that I'm just using Control 1 in a lot of situations, and there are a lot of things that Eclipse is automatically doing for me. Now let's go ahead and do a sysout and print the value of sum. Now, how do I run this program? It's simple, right? Right click, run as Java application 15. That's simple. But what I want to do is now I would want to use a debug mode. In a debug mode, what we would need to do is add some things called breakpoints. The way you add a breakpoint is just double click down here. So double click, use your mouse, do a double click, and now you can do a right click, debug as Java application. When I debug, what would happen is we would shift to a different perspective. Earlier we were talking about perspectives where we said when I'm doing different things, I would want to do different things. I would want to see different things on my screen. And this arrangement of different views is called a perspective. So we would switch now to a debug perspective. Yes. And you'd see that there are different views which are coming in here. Now you'd see here is which line I'm executing in. So there's a thread, and which is the line which it is in? It's in line 7. And also you'd see now that there are a few variables coming up. So on the here you can see what are the variables which are present. There's a variable called sum, there's a variable called array called numbers, there's a integer variable called sum, and there are arguments which are passed in which we are not making use of in here. Also you can click the breakpoints to see what are the breakpoints. So we have a breakpoint at line 7. You can disable and enable breakpoints as well in here. So you can disable it and enable it in here. And also we would look at a thing called conditional breakpoints a little later, but for now let's look at proceeding further with this particular debugging. So now we are inside this loop, we are able to see the values for each of the variables. Sum has a value of 0, that's the initialized value. And now I would want to go ahead further. The way you can look at the shortcuts for that is there are different features. So step into F5, step over F6. So usually we would use F5. When I say F5, it would, if it was a function call, it would go into the function as well. If I use F6, it would go over the function. Basically it will do the function call and go to the next statement. So let's use F5 for now. So if you are in Mac, press function F5. If you are in Windows, press F5. That's it. Function F5, you'd see that that line is executed. Now a new variable comes into picture called number. It has a value 1. Now again press F5, function F5. So you'd see now that some value is incremented. So you can now loop around this particular statement step by step. And now we are inside the println function because I pressed F5 on println as well. But I don't really want to worry about what's inside the println statement. So I would click F8. Actually, if you go and see run, there would also be F8, which is to resume. So when I press F8, it would go ahead and continue executing the rest of the program, and it prints the output. So that's actually very simple illustration of how you can debug a Java program. There are a lot of advanced features that are present in debugging. So let's debug again. So right click, debug as Java application. We would want to learn about something called watch expressions. So let's say I want to create an expression. I would want to watch what the value of it is. Right click, you can right click on a variable or something, and you can say inspect to see the value of it. So it would come up in here because it's not in the scope, it's not really live yet. What I'll do is I'll press F5 to bring it into scope, and now I can do right click on this and inspect. You can also see the shortcut in here. You can directly use that shortcut to bring it up, or I can do an inspect. Now you would see that number has a value 1. Instead of number, you can also bring up expressions in here. If there was some expression in here, you can inspect that as well. Or you can also right click and say I would want to watch this variable. So I'm saying right clicking that variable and saying watch, and you'd see that there is a new view coming in called expressions. In here you can actually add any kind of expressions using the variables which are there in there. So number into 3 I have added in, so you can see the value. So I can say number into sum. It would multiply the number with sum and show the value in here. So these expressions are useful to see different, not just the variables. So here we can see the variables, but here you can type in an expression involving these variables as well. The other thing you can do is also you can change the value. Instead of sum having a value 0, if you want to give it a value of 20, go ahead and give that. So now you would see that sum has a value of 20, and when I execute the next statement, function Fi, you'd see that sum is incremented and it becomes 21. So you can even edit the values. So just double click in here and you can change the value of the variables. The other important thing we would look at very soon, I'll just go ahead and click F8 and finish this debugging session. And now the next feature that I would want to really look at is conditional breakpoints. Right now we are breaking at every execution of this particular loop. What I want to do is I would want to have a breakpoint here only when a certain situation occurs. So I would want to activate this breakpoint only on certain scenarios. So how do I do that? Is by using a conditional breakpoint. The way you can add a conditional breakpoint is by just highlighting that. I'm double clicking on breakpoints so that I can see it in maximized view, and now I'll say conditional, and I can put in the condition in here. So I would want to have this breakpoint only when, let's say, sum is greater than 5. So I'm saying sum is greater than 5, only then activate this breakpoint, and saving it, Control S, save. And let's start another debug session. Now we have added in a conditional breakpoint. I'm doing a right click, debug as Java application. You'd see that I'm stopping in here. Let's see the values in the variable. You can see that sum has a value of 6. So already 1, 2, 3, all of them are executed, and now the code is stopping at sum 6. Now if you actually press F5, you'd see that the number which we are talking about is 4. So we are actually in the loop at this particular thing. This is a conditional breakpoint. Only when, like in the previous loops, Java would have seen that the sum at this point would have value 1, at this point 3, at this point 3 plus 3 is 6. So that's why at the end of this particular thing is when the conditional breakpoint comes into picture and it's stopping in here. So this is the conditional breakpoint. Conditional breakpoint is very useful in loops when there are hundreds of executions happening and you would want to stop at a particular point. Then you can give which condition you want to stop on, and then you can also use the conditional breakpoint to do something of this kind. Now I'm going to do F8 to complete the execution. In this step, we learned how to debug a Java program. We learned how to see the values of the variables, how to use a breakpoint, how to use a conditional breakpoint, and we also learned how to use expressions.